Has anyone been talking to snakes lately? Maybe snakes that were trying to convince you to do something that you shouldn't do. Or worse, has the Prince of Darkness himself appeared to you and suggested that you become something else altogether, that you do something really bad? I like to think that if the devil really did appear to me in that way, I would have the presence of mind to say, "Ha! You just proved that God exists. We win." I don't think that I would do that. I probably would pass out. But unless we inhabit the Harry Potter universe or the Jungle Book where snakes do indeed talk, or you've been watching some very, very scary movies that I don't want to watch, we probably don't experience temptation in the mode suggested by our readings today, although I imagine we do experience similar kinds of temptations, maybe just in different ways. I'm not talking about the temptation just to do something wrong. We have the Ten Commandments for that. We know, and I think we probably all agree, that in most circumstances it's not okay to steal or lie or kill anybody. Even though from time to time we might break or bend or chip those rules, it doesn't take that much convincing to know that they're right or wrong. But these temptations today seem to be something a little bit more different, something a bit sinister even. A blend of the truth and lie that's trying to convince the person being tempted to actually be somebody different than they are. Not just to do something different, to be a different kind of person altogether. That snake, for example, wasn't just trying to get Eve to eat a piece of fruit. That snake was trying to completely destroy the relationship between God and what God had made at the beginning of everything. And Satan wasn't trying to get Jesus to perform some magic tricks. Satan was trying to convince Jesus to be a different kind of Messiah altogether. The kind of Messiah that would come and dominate everybody else with his power, like all the so-called messiahs of the world do. Temptation is something a lot more sinister than just breaking a rule. It's an invitation to be something completely different than you know who you are and who God is calling you to be. Have you ever had an experience like that? And it didn't have to be the devil appearing to you. One that came to mind for me probably doesn't sound too much like a sin, and I don't think it was. In my first job, I worked at a religious publisher here in Chicago. And the job I really wanted was to be an editor, to work with authors, to develop books and products that serve our market. That's what I really wanted to do. We had a change of leadership, though, and our former director had been an editor, was replaced by someone that was from the world of marketing. And as I talked to him about what I hoped for myself, he suggested to me that maybe I should work in marketing for 4 or 5 years, and then maybe that might lead to being an editor. And as he was saying that, I heard 2 voices in my head. And one of them said, "That guy's your boss. You want to impress him. Take that job." And the other voice, a little bit quieter, said, "Be careful. This doesn't sound like you. This isn't what you want, and it doesn't sound like what you think you're called to be in this place. Proceed with caution." It was like that cartoon that we've all probably seen. It's pretty old now, but you know, with the little angel on one side, the little devil on the other. But to be honest with you, I had a hard time discerning in that moment which was which. Which voice to trust and which one to ignore. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? How did you tell the difference between the voice that was calling you to be yourself and that voice that was calling you to be something else? After all, my boss was not inviting me to sin. There's nothing wrong with being in marketing. At most, he was inviting me to take the path that he'd taken, maybe to make me a bit in his own image. There's no sin there. How do you tell which is God's voice and which is something else? I don't think our readings help us much today because those voices are in pretty stark contrast, right? Does anyone not know that we shouldn't listen to the serpent or to anybody called Satan? Right? Those 2 voices are probably not to be trusted. It's not been my experience that those voices speak so clearly, though. How about you? How do we discern God's voice from the voice of somebody else? Well, welcome to Lent. That is exactly what Lent is for. Our time to strip down a bit, to get a bit quiet, to really focus on hearing God's voice and being faithful to that call. How do you do that? There's lots of different ways. Jesus, the Gospels tell us over and over, evidently had to go out into the wilderness like every other day so he could listen to God's voice. Almost many stories, and you start with, Jesus went out to the wilderness to pray. Jesus went out into the desert. Where else could he hear God's voice? There were so many other voices around him, tempting him to be somebody that he wasn't. How do you do it? Do you shut yourself up in your room for 15 minutes a day just to be quiet, listen to yourself speaking? Do you write in a journal? Maybe turn off the radio on your commute, sit there quietly in the car. Maybe when your little one goes down for a nap, use that quiet time to kind of resettle yourself, listen a little bit more closely. Maybe at the end of the day, you look back on your day and see, where was God speaking to me today? What was God doing in me today? There are so many different ways to do it, and all of them are good. The key for Lent is simply to practice and practice and practice whatever helps you hear God's voice more clearly. Because you know we need people in the world that are listening carefully to God, calling them to be exactly who God is calling them to be. There are so many voices out there trying to remake us in some other image than the one that God gave us in our birth and that gave us in Christ in our baptism. You don't have to look hard for them. They're on Facebook. They're on Instagram. They're on your social media profile. They're the voices on your favorite cable TV news channel, and especially the voices in the commercials in between. There are more voices than ever trying to convince us to be something that we are not called to be. And I am afraid that it's only going to get worse and more challenging as this election season unfolds. It's going to get uglier and uglier with more invitations to be something that we're not. And I think you can expect those voices coming from every side of the aisle. How important it is for us to keep this Lent, to practice and practice and practice, so that we are being constantly attentive to that voice inside of us that's telling us this way, not that one. It can be challenging, but here's the good news for Lent. God is indeed still speaking within each of us. God is always speaking, and in ways that we can hear. It's not rocket science. It's just about us each choosing that way through which we hear God's voice most clearly, and then practicing and practicing and practicing, so that we can continue to hear the voice that is always calling us to the very best self we can be, to these images of God in Christ in a world that really needs us.